May 1940. Leon Trotsky's voice crackled across radio waves to 3,000 supporters worldwide. Stalin's terror will fail. Truth cannot be murdered. He broadcast from his fortress home in Coyoacán, Mexico City. 15-foot walls, armed guards, bulletproof doors, watchtowers, the most fortified private residence in the Western Hemisphere. The FBI watched it. Soviet intelligence watched it. The world press watched it. That same week, Ramon Mercader arrived in Mexico City as Jacques Mornard, Belgian businessman. He carried letters of introduction, false papers, and climbing equipment purchased in Paris. Within days, he, coincidentally, met Trotsky's secretary's girlfriend in a cafe. 6 months of patience followed. Dinner parties, weekend drives, slow building trust. By August, guards waved him through without searching. Stalin celebrated his 61st birthday, still waiting for confirmation. Trotsky dead. The ice axe, bought casually in a Paris shop, waited under Mercader's raincoat. How do you kill the world's most protected political exile? The answer is patience and an alpinist's tool, and one August afternoon when everything looked safe. Leon Trotsky had been running for 11 years. Exiled from the Soviet Union in 1929, he'd fled through Turkey, France, Norway, each country eventually bowing to Stalin's pressure, forcing him out. By 1937, only Mexico would take him. President Lázaro Cárdenas granted asylum. Diego Rivera, the famous muralist, helped arrange it. Trotsky arrived with his wife Natalia, a handful of followers, and a growing certainty. Stalin wanted him dead. The evidence was everywhere. Stalin's show trials in Moscow named Trotsky chief traitor, fascist agent, architect of imaginary conspiracies. The charges were absurd, but the threat was real. The GPU, Soviet secret police, operated globally with one standing order: eliminate Trotsky. By 1940, 13 assassination attempts had been documented. Poisoned letters, sabotaged cars, recruited double agents. The fortress home in Coyoacán wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Steel-reinforced doors, rotating guard shifts, alarm systems, watchtowers overlooking the street. Trotsky's daily routine was regimented: writing in his study, feeding his rabbits, organizing archives. He'd founded the Fourth International in exile, his writings circulating underground. But Stalin's reach was long and patient and closing in. In Moscow, a separate office operated within GPU headquarters. Special tasks, that's what they called it officially. Unofficially, the Assassination Bureau. 47 agents deployed globally, hunting one man. The failed machine gun raid on Trotsky's compound in May 1940 had been spectacular and stupid. Over 200 bullets fired, guards' barracks riddled, Trotsky's family miraculously unharmed. Stalin was furious. Brute force had failed. He needed precision. He needed patience. He needed Ramon Mercader. Mercader was 26, Spanish, fanatically loyal. His mother, Caridad Mercader, was a decorated GPU agent who'd personally recruited him during the Spanish Civil War. She'd watched her son train for 18 months, languages, false identities, cover stories, psychological conditioning. The target was always Trotsky. The method was always infiltration. Jacques Mornard was created from scratch, Belgian businessman, minor inheritance, fleeing war-torn Europe for opportunities in Mexico. Perfect papers. Plausible wealth. A personality built to seem harmless, cultured, forgettable. Mercader studied the role like an actor. He learned to speak with a slight French accent. He carried business cards for a trading company that didn't exist. In April 1940, he arrived in Mexico City with 2 suitcases, $800 American, and a set of climbing equipment purchased in Paris, including one ice axe. Stalin's orders were clear: get close, stay patient, wait for the perfect moment. Mercader checked into a modest hotel and began watching Trotsky's compound from a cafe 3 blocks away. He never approached directly. That would come later. First, he needed an entry point. He needed someone who already had access. He needed Sylvia Agaloff. Sylvia Agaloff was 28, American, a social worker and committed Trotskyist who'd moved to Mexico to work in the organization's secretariat. She was also lonely. In June 1940, at a café near the Palacio de Bellas Artes, a handsome Belgian businessman named Jacques Mornard struck up a conversation. He was charming, well-dressed. He spoke about European politics with sophistication, seemed genuinely interested in her work. They met again the following week. Then again. By July, they were seeing each other regularly. Dinners, drives through the city, walks in Chapultepec Park. Sylvia was falling in love. Mercader was working. Every date was reconnaissance. He asked careful questions about her work, her colleagues, her access to Trotsky's compound. He never pushed. He let information come naturally. By late July, Sylvia invited him to a dinner party attended by several of Trotsky's inner circle. Mercader played his role perfectly, polite, politically moderate, uninterested in factional debates. He met Trotsky's guards casually, shook hands, made small talk about the weather and Mexico City's traffic. Nobody suspected anything. Why would they? He was Sylvia's boyfriend. He seemed harmless. In early August, Sylvia brought him to the compound itself for the first time. Trotsky met him briefly in the courtyard, a polite handshake, a few words in French, nothing more. The Mercader observed everything. The layout, the guard rotations, the location of Trotsky's study, the fact that Trotsky sat with his back to the door when he worked. He left after 20 minutes, drove to his apartment, and sent a coded cable to Moscow. Close to subject, the ice axe, still wrapped in Parisian newspaper, sat in his closet. He would need it soon. Sylvia had no idea who she was sleeping beside. July bled into August. Mercader visited the compound 2, sometimes 3 times a week, always with Sylvia, always casual, sometimes bringing small gifts. A bottle of French wine. Pastries from a bakery downtown. The guards grew comfortable with his presence. Sylvia's Belgian boyfriend became part of the scenery. They stopped checking his identification. They waved him through with smiles. Trotsky himself barely noticed. He was deep in writing, working 16-hour days on a biography of Stalin, warning the world about the coming escalation of World War II. Mercader studied the compound like a blueprint. He noted that the study had one entrance, that Trotsky often worked alone in late afternoon, that Natalia, Trotsky's wife, usually rested in another room during the hottest part of the day. He observed the guards' patterns, shift changes at 5 p.m., a brief moment of relaxed attention during handoff. The ice axe moved from his apartment closet to his car trunk. Then he practiced the motion in his rented room at night, a single overhead swing, bringing the pick down with maximum force. Stalin's cables grew impatient. When? Why delay? Mercader's coded responses were terse, must be certain, one chance only. The failed machine gun raid had made security tighter. Any mistake would mean capture or death. But patience was the advantage. Nobody expected patience. On August 17th, Mercader brought a typed article to the compound, a piece about European politics he claimed to be writing. He asked if Trotsky might review it. Trotsky agreed. They sat together in the study for 15 minutes, Trotsky at his desk, Mercader standing behind, observing exits. It was a dress rehearsal. Mercader left, drove to a safe house, and cabled Moscow one final time. 3 days maximum. August 20th, 1940. The heat in Mexico City was oppressive, 32 degrees Celsius, air thick and still. Mercader arrived at the compound at 5 p.m. wearing a raincoat. In August. In that heat. The guards noticed but didn't question it. He'd been there dozens of times. They knew his face. One guard later testified, "I thought maybe he was worried about rain. There were clouds building west." Mercader carried a typed article under one arm. Under the raincoat, the ice axe, wrapped in newspaper from 3 months earlier, the headline still readable. Something about German advances into France. He walked through the courtyard. The guards waved. He reached the main house. Natalia Trotsky was in the bedroom, resting. Trotsky was in his study, door open, seated at his desk reviewing a manuscript. Mercader knocked lightly. Trotsky looked up, smiled. Sylvia's boyfriend, harmless Jacques. "Come in, let me see what you've written." Mercader entered. Trotsky invited him to sit, but Mercader remained standing, claiming he preferred to stretch his legs after the drive. Trotsky returned to the manuscript, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Mercader positioned himself behind and to the right. His hand moved to the ice axe under the coat. The room was silent except for the scratch of Trotsky's pen and the distant sound of traffic outside. Mercader's training said, fast, decisive, no hesitation. He drew the weapon. Trotsky was bent over the desk, absorbed, vulnerable. Mercader raised the axe overhead. For 1 second, the world held its breath. Then he brought it down with everything he had. The pick buried 3 inches into Trotsky's skull, with a sound one guard later described as, like splitting wood. What happened next, nobody expected. Trotsky screamed. The scream tore through the compound, raw, animal, impossibly loud for a man with his skull fractured. Trotsky staggered up from his desk, fighting. Blood poured down his face. Mercader stood frozen, ice axe still in hand. He'd expected instant death. He'd been trained to expect instant death. Instead, Trotsky lurched toward him, arms flailing, trying to fight back. Mercader swung again, missed. Trotsky grabbed at him, got a hand on the coat. Guards were already running. The scream had carried across the entire property. Natalia burst from the bedroom, saw her husband covered in blood, and started screaming herself. 3 guards hit the study simultaneously. They saw Mercader holding the axe, Trotsky bleeding, and they didn't hesitate. They beat Mercader to the floor, fists, boots, the butt of a pistol. Mercader dropped the weapon, tried to curl into a ball. Trotsky, still conscious, still standing, shouted in Russian, "No, he must be made to talk." The guards stopped. Trotsky staggered, collapsed into a chair. Natalia was crying, trying to stop the bleeding with her hands. Someone called for an ambulance. Someone else called the police. Mercader was dragged into the courtyard, hands bound behind his back, face already swelling from the beating. A guard picked up the ice axe from where it had fallen, newspaper wrapping soaked red, the pick dripping. Trotsky was loaded into an ambulance within 12 minutes. He remained conscious the entire ride, answering questions from police, giving his name, describing what happened. At the hospital, doctors removed skull fragments, saw the depth of the wound, and privately gave him hours to live. He lasted 26. In Moscow, Stalin waited by a telephone that didn't ring. Mexican police interrogated Mercader in a room at the compound before transferring him to headquarters. His face was a ruin. Broken nose, split lip, eye swollen shut. He stuck to his first story. "I did it for a woman. Trotsky betrayed her. It was personal." The story made no sense, and everyone knew it. No names, no details. Just vague claims about romantic revenge. Police found $800 American in his wallet, false identity papers for Jacques Mornard and Frank Jackson, and a detailed hand-drawn map of the compound's interior. They also found the ice axe, which he claimed he'd bought for mountain climbing. In August. In Mexico City, which has no mountains worth climbing with an ice axe. At the hospital, Trotsky fought. He underwent emergency surgery. Surgeons working for hours to remove bone fragments, relieve pressure on his brain. His skull had been fractured in 3 places. The weapon had penetrated nearly to the brainstem. Medical consensus: unsurvivable. But Trotsky held on. He gave a statement to police from his hospital bed, lucid despite morphine. "I am certain this is Stalin's work. The man called himself Jacques Mornard, but I do not believe this is his real name. He gained access through Sylvia Ageloff, who I am certain knew nothing." He was right on both counts. Sylvia was arrested, interrogated, and released within hours, devastated, sobbing, insisting she had no knowledge. Police believed her. She'd been used. At 7:25 p.m. on August 21st, 26 hours after the attack, Leon Trotsky died without regaining full consciousness. His final documented words spoken to Natalia hours earlier: "I will not survive this attack. Stalin has finally accomplished the task." The ice axe entered evidence as Exhibit A. The investigation began immediately. Mercader's fingerprints were sent to police agencies worldwide: Interpol, FBI, Scotland Yard. No matches. Jacques Mornard didn't exist before 1938. Neither did Frank Jackson, his alternate identity. Forensic examination of his papers revealed professional forgery, excellent quality, government-grade resources. The Soviet embassy in Mexico City issued a statement denying any connection. "We do not know this man. This appears to be a personal dispute." Mercader maintained his story under interrogation. Personal revenge. Crime of passion. No Soviet involvement. He never broke, even under pressure. Mexican authorities were suspicious but had no hard proof. Then the FBI connected dots. The climbing equipment, the patient infiltration, the professionally forged papers. It matched the pattern of previous GPU operations. Investigators found Mercader's apartment and discovered encrypted letters, one partially decoded: "Complete task, await instruction, GL." The initials matched General Leonid Eitengon, head of GPU special tasks. But there was a problem. Mercader's mother, Caridad Mercader, a known GPU operative, publicly disowned him in a statement to European newspapers. "I have no son by that name. I do not know this criminal." It was cover, but effective cover. Without cooperation from Moscow, the investigation stalled. Mercader was convicted of murder and sentenced to 20 years, the maximum under Mexican law. He was transferred to Lecumberri prison, where he would serve every day of his sentence in silence. For 18 months, Mercader refused to break. Then, in 1942, Spanish Republican refugees recognized his photograph in a newspaper. "That's Ramon Mercader. We knew him during the Civil War." The real identity confirmed. His mother, Caridad Mercader, decorated GPU agent. His history. Recruited 1937, trained in Moscow, deployed specifically to kill Trotsky. The false identities, Mornard, Jackson, had been constructed over years, refined through missions in Europe before the final assignment. Sylvia Agilov had been targeted deliberately, her relationship with Mercader entirely fabricated as access strategy. When she learned the truth in 1950, she suffered a psychological collapse and never married. Mercader served his full 20 years in Lecumberri prison. He never confessed to Soviet involvement publicly. He received regular visits from family friends, GPU handlers maintaining contact. In 1960, he was secretly awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union medal while still imprisoned, the award kept classified for decades. Upon release in May 1960, Mercader was smuggled out of Mexico via Cuba on a Soviet freighter. He arrived in Moscow to a private hero's welcome. Nikita Khrushchev, Stalin's successor, personally presented him with the medal in a closed ceremony. He was given a pension, an apartment, and a Czech wife arranged by the state. He lived quietly in Moscow for 18 years, the most patient assassin in history. Trotsky's widow, Natalia Sedova, never returned to Russia. She lived in Mexico and later France, dying in 1962, still in exile. The fortress home in Coyoacán was converted into a museum, preserved exactly as it appeared on August 20, 1940. The bullet holes from the May machine gun raid remain visible in the outer walls. Trotsky's study is intact, his desk behind glass, bloodstains preserved. The ice axe sits in a display case, newspaper wrapping yellowed but still readable. Thousands visit annually. Meanwhile, Trotsky's writings continued circulating underground, his warnings about Stalinism vindicated as archives opened decades later. The Fourth International splintered, but survived in various forms. Mercader gave one interview in 1977, near the end of his life, to a sympathetic journalist. "I did my duty to the revolution. I have no regrets." He died in Havana, Cuba in 1978 from bone cancer. His ashes were divided between Moscow and Havana, honored in both cities as a hero of the communist cause. But his final years were marked by alcoholism and isolation. People who knew him said he rarely spoke about Trotsky, but sometimes, late at night and drunk, he would mention the scream. The sound stayed with him. Even patient assassins pay prices invisible to medals and pensions. The ice axe outlived everyone involved. It sits today in the Leon Trotsky Museum in Coyoacán, Mexico City, in a glass case on the second floor. The newspaper wrapping is displayed alongside it, Le Figaro, May 12, 1940, bloodstained and fragile. Tourists photograph it daily. An ordinary alpinist's tool transformed into the century's most infamous murder weapon. Trotsky's grave lies in the museum's garden, marked with a hammer and sickle carved in stone. His archive was preserved and open to researchers. Stalin died in 1953, his own terror apparatus eventually consuming thousands. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, 41 years after Trotsky's death. Everything Stalin tried to erase survived him. The fortress, the writings, the legacy. Even the ice axe survived, waiting in its case, wrapped in old newspaper, a monument to patience and violence and the ideological murder of the 20th century. You can still visit the study where it happened. The desk sits behind protective glass, positioned exactly where Trotsky placed it. The chair faces the same direction. Guards will tell you the story if you ask. How Mercader entered in a raincoat on the hottest day of summer, how the scream echoed across the compound, how Trotsky survived long enough to ensure his killer would be questioned. The compound walls still stand, 15 feet high, bulletproof doors still installed. But the defenses were always incomplete. They stopped machine guns. They stopped armed raids. They couldn't stop patience. They couldn't stop a man willing to spend 2 years building false trust, dating an innocent woman, attending dinner parties, waiting for one August afternoon when everything looked safe. The ice axe proved that fortresses don't stop ideas, and they don't stop men who believe absolutely in their cause, right or wrong. An alpinist's tool. Purchased in Paris at a sporting goods shop on Rue de Rivoli. Wrapped in newspaper. Carried across an ocean. Hidden in closets, car trunks, under raincoats, waiting. And then not waiting anymore. The same tool that once climbed mountains became the instrument that ended a revolution's last original voice. Stalin achieved his goal. Trotsky silenced. But silence isn't the same as victory. The archives Trotsky built still exist. His analysis of Stalinism is still taught in universities. The fortress became a museum. The ice axe became a symbol. And Ramon Mercader, the patient assassin, died alone in Havana, honored by a state that would collapse a decade later, haunted by a scream that lasted 26 hours, holding a medal that meant nothing in the end. History remembers everyone. The hunter and the hunted. The weapon waits in its case, wrapped in old newspaper. Silent.